Here is part 1, written in simple and natural English. As a standalone document, a cold wind pushed through the narrow street as the late afternoon clouds hovered above the small cafe. People rushed in and out, shaking off raindrops, holding warm cups, and chatting about their day. Inside, the cafe buzzed with the usual noise of spoons tapping cups, quiet laughter, and soft music from the speakers. It was the kind of place where most customers came to escape the noise of the city, not realizing how much noise they were carrying inside themselves. When the door opened again, barely anyone looked up. A man stepped in quietly, almost as if he was trying not to disturb the warm air inside. His clothes were clean but worn, the kind that had been washed many times. His shoes were old, and the backpack he carried looked too tired to hold anything heavy. He stood still for a moment near the door, letting the warmth touch his cold face. No one paid attention to him. People were used to strangers walking in, especially ones who looked like they were searching for a cheap drink or a warm place to sit for a little while. The baristas behind the counter were busy joking with each other, talking about weekend plans and teasing one another about who made the worst coffee dot. The man took a slow breath and walked toward the counter. He didn't rush. He didn't push his way through. He simply waited until the barista noticed him. "Yeah? What can I get for you?" the barista asked, still half laughing from a joke shared just moments ago. The man gave a small smile, the kind that showed warmth, but also a bit of shyness. "I was wondering," he began softly, "would it be all right if I play your piano for a cup of coffee?" His voice was calm, almost too gentle for a place filled with noise. The barista blinked, confused at first. "Play the piano?" he repeated, and then looked toward the far corner of the cafe. There sat an old upright piano, dusty and ignored. It had been there for years, more of a decoration than an instrument. Hardly anyone touched it. Another barista overheard and laughed. "The piano? Man, nobody plays that thing anymore. Are you sure you know how to use it?" A small group of students sitting near the window looked up. One of them whispered, "Maybe he's one of those street performers who can only play one tune." They snickered quietly, thinking the moment would become their entertainment for the afternoon. The man didn't react to the laughter. He simply waited for an answer. The cafe manager, hearing the conversation, stepped forward. He was in a decent mood that day, and the idea of someone playing the piano seemed amusing. "All right," he said with a shrug. "If you want to try, go ahead. If people enjoy it, I'll get you that coffee." Some customers turned in their seats, curious now. A man asking to play a piano for a cup of coffee wasn't something they saw every day. "Thanks," the man said politely. He didn't rush toward the piano. Instead, he walked slowly, as if every step mattered. Some customers watched with smiles that suggested they expected a small show, maybe even something funny. Others didn't take him seriously at all. At a small round table near the piano, an older couple exchanged looks. They loved live music, even if it came from a stranger. The woman leaned forward slightly, wanting to get a better view. The man reached the piano and gently placed his backpack on the floor. He ran his fingers across the wooden surface, brushing away a thin layer of dust. The piano keys looked worn, some more yellow than white, but he didn't seem bothered. He pulled out the bench lightly and sat down. For a long moment, he didn't move. His hands rested on his knees. His eyes were fixed on the keys, as if he was remembering something from long ago. People who had been laughing a minute earlier grew quiet. Even the baristas slowed down their chatter as they watched him. The man lifted his hands and placed his fingers on the keys. He didn't press anything yet. He just touched them, the way someone might touch an old friend they hadn't seen in years. One of the students whispered, "Is he going to start or what?" But the others didn't respond. Something in the air felt different. Inside the man's mind, memories floated in and out like soft waves. Rooms filled with instruments. A younger version of himself practicing for hours. People clapping. Bright lights. Long nights. Loss. Silence. A life that had been full of music and then suddenly empty. He closed his eyes for a second dot, then he played the first note dot. It was soft. Almost like a whisper, but it carried through the room. A few heads turned instantly. The sound, even from an old piano, held something pure, something honest. He pressed another note, then another, and slowly a melody began to form. It wasn't loud or showy. It wasn't meant to impress. It was the kind of melody that reached into a person without asking permission. People stopped talking. A woman who had been scrolling through her phone put it down. A man who had been working on his laptop paused and looked up. The group of students leaned in, their earlier amusement fading. The melody grew smoother, richer. His fingers moved with grace and certainty. The notes blended together like they had been waiting for someone to bring them back to life. What surprised everyone was how effortless it looked. It was as if his hands knew exactly where to go without thinking. The cafe had never been so quiet. Even the coffee machine seemed to pause. The manager, watching from behind the counter, felt a chill run through him. This wasn't a random man pretending to know how to play. This was someone who had lived in music. The older couple near the piano stared with wide eyes. The woman placed a hand gently on her husband's arm, as if to say, "Do you hear that?" They both leaned back, letting the music wrap around them. The man continued to play, unaware of how deeply everyone was watching him now. Or maybe he knew. Maybe he had played for audiences bigger than all of them combined. A young boy sitting with his mother tugged at her sleeve. "He plays like the musicians on TV," he whispered. His mother hushed him softly, but nodded, her eyes never leaving the man. The melody rose a little, then softened again, like waves touching the shore. It wasn't a song people recognized. It sounded personal, as if he was telling a story through the keys, a story that didn't need words. People felt something inside themselves shift. They didn't know his name. They didn't know his past. But his music made them feel a connection to him, as if they had known him for years. The man lost himself in the tune, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he belonged somewhere. The cafe, for those minutes, became a place where he wasn't judged by his worn clothes or tired face. Here, in front of an old dusty piano, he was simply a person sharing something beautiful. As the melody continued, the laughter that had greeted him when he first walked in seemed like a distant memory. The people who had giggled were now sitting upright, listening carefully, ashamed of their earlier assumptions. The barista who had laughed the loudest found himself leaning forward, hands frozen mid-task. He couldn't believe that the man he had joked about was playing like someone born with music in his veins. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows. Inside, the cafe felt warm in a different way now. Not just from the heat, but from the feeling that everyone was part of something unexpected and special. The man at the piano didn't stop. He played as if the world outside didn't exist. The music filled every corner of the room, settling into people's hearts. He didn't ask for applause. He didn't ask for attention. He only asked for a cup of coffee. And without knowing it, he had given everyone in that cafe something they didn't even know they needed. Moment of quiet beauty on an ordinary afternoon. When he finally lifted his fingers from the keys, the sound lingered in the air, soft and fading like the last touch of sunlight before evening. For a second, no one moved. No one spoke. The moment hung there, delicate and powerful. And then slowly, the room came back to life. The cafe stayed quiet for a few long seconds, after the man lifted his hands from the piano. It was the kind of silence that felt full, not empty. People weren't sure whether to clap, speak, or simply breathe. They had just witnessed something they didn't expect, and their thoughts were still trying to catch up with the moment. The man sat still on the bench, his fingers resting gently on his lap. He looked at the keys like they were pieces of his past that he had finally touched again. He didn't turn around. He didn't look to see if anyone cared. It seemed as if he had played that entire piece for himself, not for the room. At the counter, the barista who had laughed earlier finally snapped out of his frozen state. He glanced around, embarrassed by how easily he had judged the stranger. He picked up a cup, then put it down again, not sure what to do. His mind replayed the moment when the man had asked for a cup of coffee in exchange for playing the piano. Now that offer didn't feel funny at all. A soft clap broke the quiet. It came from an older woman sitting with her husband. She smiled warmly, her eyes a little wet, as if the melody had touched something deep inside her. Her husband joined in, and then others followed. The applause grew louder, spreading across the cafe like a wave. The man finally turned his head. He looked surprised, almost shy, as if he hadn't expected anyone to appreciate what he had played. He gave a small nod, a simple gesture that showed both gratitude and humility. The cafe manager walked out from behind the counter, wiping his hands nervously on his apron. He approached the man slowly, unsure of how to speak now. "That was," he said, searching for a word that felt true, "beautiful." The man nodded again. "Thank you," he replied softly. You definitely earned that coffee." The manager let out a short, awkward laugh, but this time it wasn't mocking. It was a laugh of respect, and maybe even awe. "I appreciate it," the man said. He stood up from the bench and picked up his backpack. The applause faded as he walked toward the counter. People watched him closely, some with smiles, others with curiosity. A few whispered among themselves, wondering where he had learned to play like that. The barista finally stepped forward with the cup of coffee he had prepared. "Here you go," he said softly, offering it with both hands. The man smiled. "Thank you." The barista hesitated. Sorry for earlier. I shouldn't have laughed." "It's all right," the man replied gently. "You didn't know." The barista nodded, relieved but still feeling guilty. The man took the first sip of his coffee and sighed in a way that made it clear he hadn't tasted something warm in a while. People watched him closely, waiting to see if he would sit or leave. He found an empty table near the window. It wasn't far from the piano, but it gave him enough space to sit alone. He placed the cup on the table and set his backpack beside his chair. For a few minutes, things stayed quiet. People went back to their conversations, but their voices were softer than before. The sound of the piano still lingered in the air like a pleasant scent. One of the students from the group near the window whispered to her friend, "He plays better than the musicians at school events." Her friend nodded. "Way better." A man wearing glasses approached the stranger slowly. He stopped beside the table and cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said politely. "I just wanted to say that your playing was incredible." The stranger looked up, surprised again. "Thank you," he said. "I used to work at a concert hall," the man continued. "I've heard many musicians, but the way you played, it had something special. Something real." The stranger gave a small smile. "I'm glad it reached you." "You must have trained for years," the man said. "Did you play professionally?" The stranger paused for a moment. He didn't seem uncomfortable. He just looked like someone deciding how much of his truth he wanted to share. "I used to," he said simply. The man with glasses nodded, respecting the short answer. "Well, I hope you continue. The world needs music like that." He left the stranger alone after that, not wanting to pry. A few minutes later, the cafe door opened again, bringing in another rush of cool air. A couple walked in, shaking off the rain. They stopped when they heard people whispering. "You missed it," someone said. "A man just played the piano, and it was amazing." More customers glanced at the stranger now, curious to see the man who had turned a quiet afternoon into something unforgettable. But he didn't look back at them. He simply sat with his coffee, staring out the window at the passing cars and wet streets. The older couple sitting closest to the piano exchanged glances. They spoke quietly to each other, trying to figure out how to approach the stranger without making him feel uncomfortable. Finally, the woman stood up and walked toward him. "May I sit here?" she asked gently. The man looked up. He nodded. "Of course." She took the seat across from him. "I just wanted to thank you," she said softly. "My husband and I haven't heard music played with that kind of feeling in a long time. It reminded us of our younger days." He listened with a calm expression. "Thank you for saying that. You must have had a deep connection with the piano," she said. "I could hear it. Every note felt like it came from a part of your heart." He looked at his hands for a moment, then back at her. "The piano has been a big part of my life," he admitted. "Even when I walked away from everything else, I couldn't walk away from music completely." The woman nodded slowly. She didn't ask more. She didn't push for details. She simply respected his space. After a moment, she stood up and smiled. "Well, I'm glad you shared your gift today. It meant more than you know." He returned the smile. "Thank you." She walked back to her husband, who was waiting with a warm expression. Across the cafe, the baristas whispered among themselves. "Do you think he's famous or something?" one asked. "I don't know," the other replied. "But he plays like someone who is trained by the best." "Maybe he was," the first barista said, looking at the man again. The cafe manager stepped out from the side with a thoughtful expression. He watched the stranger for a long moment before approaching him again. "You know," the manager began, "if you ever want to come back and play again, you're welcome to." People liked it. It brought a good feeling to the place. The stranger looked up, surprised by the offer. "Thank you," he said. "That means a lot. You don't have to play for coffee," the manager added quickly. "You can just play if you feel like it." The man nodded politely. "I'll think about it." The manager smiled, then stepped away to take care of other customers. The stranger finished his coffee slowly. He didn't seem in a hurry to leave. It was as if the warmth of the cafe, the sound of the rain, and the gentle hum of quiet conversations gave him a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. The group of students whispered among themselves again, and one of them finally gathered the courage to walk up to him. "Sir," the student said, eyebrows raised in admiration, "do you teach piano? Because if you do, I'd like to learn from you." The stranger blinked, surprised. "Teach?" he repeated softly. "Yeah," the student said. "I've been trying to learn for years, but I never found a teacher who played with real emotion. You? You played like someone who knows life." The stranger looked thoughtful for a moment. "I haven't taught in a long time," he said gently. "Well, if you ever decide to, I'd be your first student," the young man said with a smile. The stranger nodded. "Thank you. That means a lot." The student returned to his friends, who teased him for being bold, but they also nodded in agreement. They had all felt the same time passed. The stranger stayed for a while longer, watching the world outside as if he was remembering something he had left behind. His eyes held a mix of tiredness and hope, two emotions often found in people who had lived through highs and lows. At one point, he looked back at the piano. The bench was still slightly pulled out from where he had sat. The keys were still touched with the memory of his music. He took a deep breath. For the first time in years, he felt the small spark of something he thought he had lost, a sense of belonging, a sense of being seen. And for him, that meant everything. The rain outside softened, leaving behind a gentle mist that clung to the cafe windows. The sound of passing traffic grew quieter as the evening settled in. Inside, the cafe felt warmer, almost cozy, as if the melody the stranger had played earlier still floated in the air. People walked around more softly now, spoke more gently, and looked at the piano with a new kind of respect. The stranger still sat near the window with his empty cup, watching the dim lights reflect on the wet street. He seemed deep in thought, like a man caught between the past and the present. The music he had played had come from a place inside him that he rarely touched anymore, and something about it stirred memories he had tried to leave behind. The cafe slowly filled again as the workers from nearby shops came in for a warm drink before heading home. Some noticed the man near the window and whispered quietly, already hearing the story from those who had been there earlier. "That's him," one person muttered to a friend. "The one who played the piano." Another person nodded. "I heard it was unbelievable." People looked at him with curiosity, but not with the rude or doubtful expressions he had seen when he first walked in. Now their eyes carried interest, admiration, and a little wonder. The barista cleaned cups behind the counter, still thinking about how quickly everything had changed. He remembered laughing at the man earlier, assuming he was trying to get a free drink by pretending to know something he didn't. Now he felt ashamed each time the memory surfaced. The older couple remained seated near the piano. They were in no hurry to leave, still enjoying the quiet calm the performance had brought. The woman occasionally glanced at the stranger, her face soft with kindness, as though she hoped he would play again just once. The cafe manager approached the man slowly, trying not to disturb whatever thoughts he was lost in. "Everything all right?" the manager asked gently. The stranger looked up from the window. "Yes," he replied, with a faint smile. "Just thinking." "You really moved everyone today," the manager said. "I haven't heard this place that quiet in years." The man's smile flickered. "I wasn't trying to make a show." "I know," the manager replied. "That's what made it so powerful." The stranger nodded, appreciating the honesty. After a moment, the manager leaned on the chair beside him. "If you don't mind me asking, where did you learn to play like that?" The man hesitated. He looked at his hands, the fingers that once traveled across piano keys for hours every day. They were not as smooth or strong as before, but they remembered. "I grew up around music," he said quietly. "The piano was something I held on to through many parts of my life. Some were good, some weren't." "You must have been trained professionally," the manager guessed. The stranger stayed silent for a moment. His eyes held a deep emotion that made the manager regret asking. "Something like that," he finally replied. The manager nodded respectfully and didn't push further. "Well, you're welcome here anytime. People like you bring a different kind of life to this place." The stranger appreciated the offer. He could tell it wasn't just something said out of courtesy. Soon after, the manager returned to his duties. A young girl, no more than 10, approached the piano with wide eyes. Her mother followed behind her, whispering for her not to touch anything. But the girl simply stared at the keys, as if trying to understand how something so simple could create something so beautiful. The stranger noticed her and smiled softly. He could see the curiosity in her eyes, that spark he used to carry when he was her age. "Do you like music?" he asked gently from across the room. The girl looked at him shyly, then nodded. "Would you like to try a note?" he asked. Her mother looked embarrassed. "Oh no, she shouldn't. It's fine," the stranger said kindly. "A single note won't hurt the piano." The girl stepped closer to the bench and touched one of the keys carefully. A soft tone echoed through the cafe, making her smile. "It sounds pretty," she said quietly. "It always does," the man replied. "Music has a way of speaking even when words don't." Her mother smiled with gratitude as she gently guided her daughter away from the piano. The stranger leaned back in his chair, remembering himself as a boy sitting at his first piano. His mother had taken him to an old community center that barely had working heat, but the upright piano there had changed everything for him. He remembered touching those keys for the first time, the same way the little girl had, with a mix of fear and excitement. That moment had opened the door to years of hard work, performances, crowded rooms, and dreams he chased all over the world. But it had also led to exhaustion, heartbreak, and lost Dot as he looked at the piano now. He felt both comfort and pain that the evening crowd grew thicker. And soon, many of the earlier customers had already left. But the story of the pianist continued spreading among the new ones, like a gentle rumor carried from table to table. People glanced toward the stranger as they spoke about him. Some smiled at him politely. Others watched him with admiration. A delivery driver waiting for his order approached him. "Hey man," he said, "heard you played earlier. Folks said it was amazing." The stranger nodded humbly. "Thank you. You thinking of playing again?" the driver asked. The stranger looked at the piano for a moment and shook his head lightly. "Not today." "That's all right," the driver said. "Just glad people got to hear something special." He left with his order. But his words stayed with the stranger Dot. As more time passed, the cafe grew warmer, filled with the soft sounds of conversations and quiet laughter. The piano sat still in the corner, no longer just a forgotten piece of furniture. People now looked at it with appreciation, as though it had been given a new purpose. The stranger wondered if he had been given one too. He stayed seated near the window, thinking about the life he had walked away from. Once, he had played for crowds so large, he couldn't even see the last row of the audience. But that life had been filled with pressure, endless travel, expectations, and a loneliness that grew deeper over the years. He remembered moments backstage, holding his hands over his face, trying to breathe through the weight on his chest. He remembered the night he played beautifully for thousands of people, but felt nothing but emptiness when the applause ended. He remembered losing someone dear to him, someone who had been the reason he played in the first place. After that, he had left everything behind. Music had felt too heavy. Now, sitting in a cafe miles away from the world he once knew, he felt something he hadn't expected. He missed it, not the fame, not the bright lights, not the applause. He missed the feeling of connecting with people through music, the way a simple melody could comfort someone or bring back forgotten memories. The thought surprised him. As he sat there quietly, the older couple from earlier gathered their things and prepared to leave. Before stepping out, the woman stopped at his table. "I hope you keep playing," she said softly. "The world needs people like you, not because you're talented, but because you play with your heart." The man looked up at her, touched by her words. "Thank you," he whispered. Her husband added, "If you ever perform somewhere again, we'd be the first to buy tickets." They both smiled warmly before heading out into the soft night. The stranger watched them leave, then looked at the piano again. He didn't touch it again that evening, but something inside him shifted, something small but steady. As the cafe began to close, the manager approached him once more. "We're closing soon," he said gently, "but you're welcome to come back tomorrow, or any day." The stranger nodded. "Thank you for the kindness." The manager gave him a sincere smile. "You brought something special to this place today. I hope you know that." The stranger stood up, lifting his backpack over his shoulder. "It was just a melody," he said. "It was more than that," the manager replied. The man walked toward the door slowly, glancing once more at the piano before stepping out into the cool night air. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know if he would return to the same cafe or if life would pull him in another direction. But as he walked through the quiet streets, he carried a warm feeling inside him, a feeling he thought he had lost forever. A small spark, a reminder that music still lived within him, and that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to let it back into his life. The rain had stopped by the time the sun began to lower behind the tall buildings, leaving the streets glowing with a soft, golden light. The cafe was still full of the warm energy that the man's performance had created earlier. People kept talking about it even hours later. Some replayed the short clips they had recorded. Others simply smiled to themselves whenever the memory came back to them. It was the kind of quiet excitement that lingered in the air long after the applause faded. But for the man who had played the piano, the day was not over yet. He sat outside now, on a wooden bench beside the cafe window. The warm cup of free coffee still sat in his hands, though it had already cooled a little. He looked calm, almost peaceful, as he watched people pass by. No one could tell what he was thinking, but something about his face showed that he was not someone who chased attention. He looked like someone who had lived through many stories, but kept most of them inside. Inside the cafe, the staff still talked about him. The two workers who had laughed at him earlier felt a mix of embarrassment and awe. They now knew they had judged him too quickly. The manager kept glancing at the piano as if it were something magical. Even the customers who had not been there during the performance asked to hear the story again. It spread from one table to another like a warm breeze. After a little while, the cafe door opened, and the owner walked out. He was a gentle man in his middle years, with a kind smile and a calm voice. He approached the bench where the piano player sat. "Is the coffee okay?" The owner asked softly. The man nodded with a small smile. "It's good." "Thank you." There was a short pause between them, but it didn't feel uncomfortable. The owner sat down beside him, leaving enough space to show respect. "You've given everyone here something special today," the owner said. "I don't think anyone expected to hear something like that." The man looked down at the cup in his hands. "Sometimes people don't look closely. They miss things." "Maybe they're in a hurry," the owner suggested. The man gave a small nod, but his eyes looked distant, as if he was thinking about something else entirely. "Do you play professionally?" the owner asked gently. The man didn't answer right away. When he finally did, his voice stayed quiet. "I used to." There was something in those two words, a quiet heaviness, a piece of his past hidden inside them. The owner noticed it, but didn't want to push. He simply waited. After a moment, the man sighed softly. "I stopped years ago. Life changed. Things got complicated." The owner nodded in understanding. He knew that life often forced people to let go of the things they loved most. Sometimes it wasn't about talent. Sometimes it was about timing or responsibility or heartbreak. "Well," the owner said gently, "if you ever want to play here again, you're welcome. You don't need to ask for coffee next time." The man smiled at that, a real smile, the kind that softened his whole face. "Thank you. That means a lot." They sat quietly for a few minutes, watching the people walking by on the street. Some hurried home, some laughed with friends, some talked on their phones. Life carried on in its usual ways, unaware of the small moment happening on the cafe bench. After a while, a group of 3 teenagers walked out of the cafe. They held their drinks and talked to each other excitedly. When they saw the man sitting on the bench, they hesitated for a moment, then approached him. One of the girls stepped forward. "Sir, can we ask something?" The man nodded. "How long have you been playing the piano?" she asked. The man seemed slightly surprised, but he answered honestly. "Most of my life." "You? You play better than the people we see in competitions online," one of the boys added. "It felt like the whole room disappeared when you played." The man's eyes softened. "Music does that to people. It gives them a place to feel." The teenagers thanked him again and walked away, still talking about him with admiration. The owner looked at the man with a gentle smile. "You've made their day, maybe even their month." The man gave a small shrug, though there was a humble warmth in his eyes. I just played. As the evening deepened, the cafe became quieter. The lights inside glowed warmly through the windows. A soft breeze carried the faint smell of wet pavement. Everything felt peaceful. The owner stood up. I should get back inside. If you need anything, just let me know. The man nodded gratefully. Thank you again. For the coffee. And for being kind. Kindness is easy when someone deserves it, the owner said before going back inside. The man sat alone for a little while longer. His thoughts drifted to memories. He rarely touched the stages he once stood on, the people who listened, the promises he made, the ones he couldn't keep. He hadn't expected to think about any of it today. He had walked into the cafe only to get something warm to drink, not knowing his hands would touch a piano again. But when he saw that old upright piano, something inside him had shifted. Something gentle, something old, something familiar. And now, as he sat on the bench outside, he felt a strange mixture of calm and restlessness. He looked down at his hands. The same hands that once played across grand pianos in bright halls. The same hands that had been silent for years. Today, they had found sound again. As he stared at them, footsteps approached. This time, it was the young worker from earlier, the one who had doubted him when he first asked to play for a free coffee. The worker looked nervous, holding a small paper bag. Sir, he began awkwardly, I wanted to say sorry. We didn't know who you were, or what you could do. The man looked up at him calmly. You have nothing to apologize for. You just didn't expect it. The worker nodded, though his face still showed guilt. He held out the small paper bag. This is for you. It's just a muffin, but I wanted to offer something. The man accepted it with a gentle smile. Thank you. That's kind. The worker looked relieved. You really made everything different today. The customers, the staff, everyone is talking about it. I don't think we'll forget it. The man nodded softly. I'm glad the music reached people. The worker hesitated and asked quietly, Will you come again? The man took a moment before answering. Maybe. The worker smiled and went back inside. The man leaned back on the bench and closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the cool evening air. He felt something shifting inside, not something loud or dramatic, but something gentle. A feeling he had not allowed himself to feel for a long time. Hours passed slowly. The cafe eventually grew quieter as customers left one by one. The sky turned a deep blue, and the first stars began to appear. The owner turned off the bright indoor lights, leaving only a soft glow near the counter. He walked outside again and found the man still sitting there. We're about to close soon, the owner said gently. The man opened his eyes and nodded. I'll get going. He stood up slowly. The owner watched him, sensing that he carried a kind of quiet heaviness, not sadness exactly, but something deeper. Take care of yourself, the owner said. You too, the man replied. The man began walking down the sidewalk. His steps were unhurried, almost thoughtful. He held the small paper bag in one hand and the empty coffee cup in the other. Behind him, the cafe owner stood at the door, watching him walk away. Something told him that this was not the end of the story. Not for the man, not for the cafe, not for the people whose hearts the music had touched. And as the man disappeared into the soft glow of the streetlights, the night carried with it a quiet promise that life still had something waiting for him ahead. The night was cool and quiet as he walked away from the cafe, but his mind was still full of the soft echoes of the music he had played earlier. Every step he took felt slow, thoughtful, and somehow heavier than usual. He hadn't expected the day to unfold the way it did. He hadn't planned to touch a piano at all. Yet life had guided him into that cafe, placed him in front of those keys. and unlocked a piece of him he thought he had closed off forever. He walked toward a small park not far from the cafe. The streetlights glowed gently, casting long shadows across the grass. The air smelled lightly of damp soil and fresh leaves. He found an empty bench under a tree and sat down. It was the kind of quiet space where thoughts came more easily, and memories often followed. He looked at his hands again. Even under the dim light, they looked tired but steady. He rubbed his thumb across his palm, a habit from years of practice, years of performing, years of living inside music. For so long he had tried to push that part of his life into the past, but today reminded him that music didn't leave so easily. It waited. It stayed. It remembered him, even when he tried to forget it. As he sat there thinking, he didn't notice someone approaching until a gentle voice spoke from the side. "Excuse me." "Sir?" He turned to see a young woman standing a few steps away. She held her phone nervously in her hand. "Sorry to bother you," she said, "but were you the one who played at the cafe earlier?" He nodded slowly. Her face lit up with relief. "I thought so. I wasn't there when you played, but my friends sent me the video. I've been looking for you to say. That was beautiful. Really beautiful." He offered a small smile. "I'm glad it touched you." She took a breath, then asked hesitantly, "Can I sit?" He nodded again, and she sat on the other side of the bench, leaving a respectful space between them. "I'm studying music," she said, "but sometimes I feel lost. Some days I play, and it feels like the world makes sense. Other days, it feels like I'm trying to climb a wall that keeps getting taller." He listened quietly. "My teacher always says passion is enough," she continued softly. "But I'm not sure anymore. When I heard you, it made me feel something I almost forgot. It made me want to keep going." Her voice carried a sincerity that touched him more than he expected. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the same hunger he had in his younger years, the hunger to create something that mattered. He spoke gently. "Music is not always easy. Sometimes it feels like it asks for more than we can give. But if it's truly in your heart, don't let it go." She nodded, her eyes softening. "Thank you. That means more than you know." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment until she stood up again. "I won't keep you," she said with a warm smile. "I just wanted to say thank you." He nodded faintly. "Take care." She walked away, leaving him alone with the quiet night once more. But something inside him felt a little lighter after speaking with her. Maybe the music wasn't meant to be buried forever. Maybe it was meant to be shared in small moments like these. He stayed in the park for a while longer, watching the soft glow of the lights around him and listening to the distant hum of cars passing by. The world felt big and small at the same time. Gradually, he stood up and made his way toward the place he was staying, a small rented room in an old building not too far from the main street. The building wasn't fancy, but it was quiet, and that was enough for him. He climbed the creaky stairs slowly and unlocked his door. Inside, the room was simple. A small bed, a desk with a few books, a chair, and a suitcase pushed against the wall. There was no piano here, no keyboard, no instrument at all. He sat on the edge of the bed and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. A tired sigh escaped him. He didn't know why the cafe had left such a strong feeling inside him. Maybe it was the music. Maybe it was the reactions. Maybe it was the way people looked at him, as if they saw something he had forgotten about himself. He lay back on the bed and closed his eyes. His mind drifted to memories of old stages, bright lights, and long hours of practice. He remembered audiences who cheered and others who sat in silence, soaking in every note. He remembered the people he had played for, the people he had lost, and the times when music carried him through moments he thought he wouldn't survive. as he slowly drifted toward sleep. One question stayed in his mind. Was today just a moment? Or the beginning of something he needed to return to? The next morning, sunlight streamed gently through the curtains. He woke with a feeling he couldn't quite describe. Somewhere between peace and unease. Somewhere between comfort and uncertainty. He sat up, rubbed his face, and stood slowly. The morning was quiet. The city outside was just beginning to move. Cars honked in the distance. People's voices floated through the open window. He made his way downstairs and stepped out to the street. He didn't know where he was going yet. He just let his feet carry him. Eventually, he found himself near the cafe again. He paused across the street, watching it from a distance. The sign above the door, the soft lights inside, the people walking in and out, it all felt strangely familiar now. He didn't know if he should go inside again. Part of him felt shy, almost embarrassed. What if they expected him to play again? What if they treated him differently now? What if someone recognized him from his past? He wasn't ready for that. He stood there thinking until the cafe owner stepped out with a broom in hand. He looked up and spotted the man standing across the street. A warm smile spread across his face. "Good morning." The owner called out cheerfully. The man hesitated, then nodded politely. "Morning." "Come in," the owner said, waving gently. "The place is open. You're always welcome." The man looked at the ground for a moment, then slowly crossed the street. He stepped inside, the familiar warm smell of coffee greeting him instantly. Several of the staff members noticed him and smiled shyly. A couple of them whispered to each other with excitement. Clearly, the memory of his performance still lingered. One of the workers approached him. "Would you like the same coffee as yesterday?" they asked kindly. He nodded with a small smile, feeling a quiet sense of comfort. As he waited, he glanced over at the piano. It stood quietly in the corner, its dark wood gleaming under the soft lights. It felt like it was watching him, calling him gently, but without pressure. When the owner came over with his drink, he followed the man's gaze. "You can play if you want," the owner said softly. The man shook his head lightly. "Not today. Maybe another time." "No rush," the owner said with understanding. "Just know the piano is yours whenever you feel ready." The man felt a warmth in his chest at those words. No expectations. No demands. Just an open door. He thanked the owner and sat at a small table by the window. As he sipped his warm drink, he watched people walk past outside and felt the city slowly wake up. Every now and then, his eyes drifted back to the piano. He wasn't ready yet, but something deep inside him was slowly turning toward music again. Like a plant leaning toward sunlight. Something was changing. Something was beginning, even if he didn't fully understand it yet. The day before had opened a door he thought was permanently closed. And now the world felt just a little bigger, a little brighter, a little more full of possibility. He didn't know where this new path would lead, but for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to take the next step. The morning passed quietly as he sat by the window of the cafe, watching people rushing by as the city slowly woke up. His coffee cup sat warm between his palms, and although he hadn't touched the piano today, something inside him felt different. It wasn't fear anymore. It wasn't hesitation. It felt more like a soft pull, a gentle reminder that the music within him wasn't gone, just waiting. For a long time he had lived quietly, almost hidden from the world. He kept to himself, stayed in small places, never drew attention. Music had once been everything to him, but the weight of life had slowly pushed it aside. Responsibilities, loss, unexpected turns, so many moments had pushed him further from the person he once was. But yesterday changed something. When his fingers touched the keys again, something old and familiar returned. Something he had almost forgotten he needed. He finished his coffee and stood up. He placed the empty cup gently on the counter and gave a small nod to the worker standing there. The worker smiled back with a warmth that made him feel strangely welcome. He stepped outside. The sunlight had grown stronger now, turning the sidewalks bright and warm. People walked in every direction, some rushing, some wandering slowly, some laughing with friends. He stood there for a moment, taking in the life around him. He didn't know where he wanted to go yet, but he felt like walking Dot as he made his way down the street. He passed small shops, a row of trees, a bus stop filled with commuters, and the distant sound of someone humming. Everything felt simple and peaceful. Not far ahead, he noticed a small square where people often gathered. There were benches, a fountain, and a few children playing. And on one side of the square, he saw something he hadn't noticed before. A man unloading a small upright piano from a truck. Dot. The man paused and watched, curious. The piano was old but charming, with carved legs and a faded top. The person unloading it looked exhausted but determined. Wiping sweat from his forehead, Dot, the musician in him, reacted before he could stop himself. He walked closer. "Need a hand?" he asked quietly. The man looked up in surprise, then nodded gratefully. "Yes, please." "This thing is heavier than it looks." Together, they carefully moved the piano to the open part of the square. It wasn't easy, but with steady hands and slow steps, they placed it near the fountain. "Thanks," the man said, catching his breath. "I'm just setting up for a small community event later. People around here love live music." He nodded softly, looking at the piano with quiet appreciation. "You play?" the man asked. He hesitated. "A little." "Well, if you ever feel like playing today, even for a few minutes, it would help draw people in. It doesn't have to be fancy." He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He simply nodded politely. He walked to a nearby bench and sat down. People continued moving around the square, parents guiding small children, elderly couples walking slowly, teenagers laughing together. The fountain's water sparkled in the sun. And the piano sat there quietly waiting. The old feeling he had yesterday slowly returned. A kind of warmth in his chest. A soft pull that wouldn't go away. After several minutes of sitting quietly, he stood up. He walked toward the piano. The man who had set it up looked surprised but happy. "Want to try?" he asked. He nodded gently. He sat on the old wooden bench in front of the piano. He ran his fingers lightly across the keys, not playing yet, just feeling the smooth, slightly worn surface. The surface felt familiar, comforting, like greeting an old friend. For a moment, he closed his eyes. The square noise faded in his mind. The footsteps, the laughter, the fountain all softened. He allowed himself to breathe deeply. Then his fingers pressed the first notes. The sound was gentle at first, almost shy. But as he continued, the melody grew fuller, richer. It spilled through the square like a warm breeze. People nearby lifted their heads. Children stopped running. A couple paused mid-conversation. The sound carried far, drifting into corners of the square and pulling people toward it. He played not to impress, not to show skill, but to feel. His music was soft, but full of emotion, like a story spoken through notes instead of words. Little by little, a small crowd gathered. Some people stood close. Others stayed back, but listened with quiet attention. Someone began recording on their phone. A child slowly approached the piano, eyes wide in amazement. The man continued playing, letting the music guide him. Each note came naturally, like breathing. Memories came too clearer now. He remembered the stages he once played on, the sound of applause, the joy of creating something beautiful. He remembered how music once shaped his life, brought him comfort, gave him purpose. When he finished the piece, the square burst into gentle applause. It wasn't loud or wild. It was warm, grateful, honest. He opened his eyes, surprised at how many people had gathered. He gave a small smile, humble and quiet. One of the children stepped closer. "Can you play more?" The child asked softly. He felt a small laugh escape him. A real laugh. "Maybe one more?" He began again, this time with a lighter tune, something playful and full of life. The children giggled and swayed. The adults smiled. Even the man who owned the piano stood with his arms folded, nodding with admiration not as he played. Something inside him finally shifted completely. Not the quiet pull of yesterday, not the hesitation of this morning, something stronger, something brighter. He realized he didn't want to run from music anymore. Didn't want to hide the part of himself that had once mattered more than anything. He finished the second piece, and the crowd clapped again. A few people thanked him directly. One woman said, "Your music made my morning." Another whispered, "I haven't heard something this peaceful in a long time." Each word warmed him in a way he hadn't expected. He stood from the bench and stepped back. But the piano owner said gently, "You're welcome to play any time. Really, you brought life to this place." He bowed his head slightly. "Thank you." As the crowd slowly scattered, he walked back to the bench where he had been sitting earlier. The sunlight felt warmer now. The air felt lighter. He sat down, letting everything sink in. He knew it now. This wasn't a moment. This wasn't an accident. It was a beginning. Music was not part of his past. It was part of him. And he didn't want to lose it again. He sat there quietly for a long time, watching the fountain sparkle. People continued to smile at him as they walked by, some giving small nods of admiration. Eventually, he stood up and started walking again, this time with a clearer direction. He walked back toward the cafe, not because he needed coffee, but because that was where everything began again. When he stepped inside, the owner looked up, surprised but happy. "You came back," the owner said warmly. The man nodded. "Yes." The owner sensed something in his expression, something calmer, stronger, more certain. "Would you like to play today?" he asked softly. The man looked at the piano sitting quietly in its corner. The same piano that brought his music back to life. He nodded. "I think I would." The owner smiled wide. "Take your time." The man walked slowly toward the piano. His hands didn't shake this time. His heart didn't feel heavy. He sat down gently, let out a slow breath, and placed his fingers on the keys. And then he played. Not for a free coffee. Not to impress anyone. Not because someone asked, but because music was his truth, and he was finally ready to live it again. Calf filled with soft, beautiful sound. People turned their heads, stopped conversations, and listened with quiet admiration. The music wrapped around the room like warm light. Outside, the day continued as usual. Cars passed. People hurried. The world moved on. But inside the cafe, something special was happening. A man who once walked away from his music returned to it. And the first note he played marked not the end of the story, but the beginning of everything he had yet to find. He woke up before the sun, long before the town even stretched its arms. The sky outside the small window was still dark, with only a soft hint of morning light trying to push through the clouds. He lay still for a moment, listening to the faint sound of distant traffic, thinking about everything that had happened in the past few days. It felt unreal, almost like someone else's life. But it was his. Every part of it was real. He sat up slowly, rubbing his hands together to warm them. Even though he had stayed in a cleaner, quieter room than he was used to, he still felt out of place. The sheets were fresh. The air smelled like lavender from the freshener plugged into the wall. And the silence felt too perfect for a man who had lived most of the past few years surrounded by noise, crowds, and uncertainty. Still, he felt something different inside him that morning, a kind of calm strength he hadn't felt in years. Maybe it was the way people had looked at him yesterday after he played. Maybe it was the way the cafe owner had spoken to him with genuine respect. Or maybe it was simply the way the piano had welcomed him like an old friend, reminding him that his gift had never truly left him. He stood up, stretching his back. His body ached a little, but not in a painful way, more like a reminder of the long road that had brought him here. He washed his face, combed his hair with his fingers, and looked at himself in the mirror. His reflection seemed different. Not younger, not cleaner, just more alive. He whispered to himself, "Today will be better. It has to be." Downstairs, the cafe was still closed, but he could see lights on inside. The morning staff was getting ready, arranging pastries, wiping tables, setting up the machines. He waited outside for a moment, unsure if he should knock or walk in. He,